Oh, yes, I can. Hello there. I am just Sam. That's all I am. I'm just Sam. And today, on this fine hour of whenever anyone watches this, I'm going to be redesigning and slightly reworking Bloom's nemesis from World of Winx. I'm probably not going to redesign all the Winx nemesis, at least in quick succession. However, I do plan to redesign Aisha's because it relates to Bloom's quite a lot. Let me explain. So, World of Winx came after the Rainbow Deal with the Devil, but was a Netflix original set in a separate universe. This is relevant because the problems in the main series make their way into the show, despite it supposedly being for all the audiences. I think this is the best version of Winx past season 4. It's not better than season 4, but it's better than season 5 through 8 and better than Fate the Winx Saga. Hopefully the new reboot coming soon, at least as time of recording, will take its place, and I will talk about that some other time. One of the main problems carried over from the main series is the misunderstanding of the Winx characters in general, specifically Bloom and Aisha. In essence, Bloom and Aisha have their personalities switched from the OG show, like season 1 to season 4. And it's switched and watered down. Bloom was a hot-headed and aggressive character, and she was quite impulsive, yet she knew she could rely on her friends. She held the all-powerful dragon flame, sure, but her impulsiveness would work against her when she was just flailing around angrily, and this happens multiple times throughout the show, where she just decides to attack people. A few examples of this being when she assaulted Diaspro at a sports event, just because I was unprompted. She just thought she was evil because she was talking to Sky. She then threw all her power against Valtor when he just convinced her that he killed her parents and made her mad. And then she was just like, eh. And pretty much anytime she sees Icy, she just blasts. And in general, her powers are the least flexible of the Winx. It's just power blasts and fire. Very rarely is it something interesting. Fire powers just end up like that, but hot-headed is my point here, and aggressive. Even in normal life, just everyday issues, she was quite outspoken and hot-headed. And my point here being, thematically, Sinka, I don't really like the name, Sinka, who is Aisha's canon nemesis, makes more sense to be Bloom's nemesis given it's trying to play off Aisha's quote-unquote hot-headedness, which only comes in, she only gains that personality trait in the Nick dub, or again after the deal. In fact, Vertigo, who is Bloom's nemesis in canon, actually makes very little sense for Bloom, given it's a struggle she doesn't really face very often, if ever, in the actual show. Mostly because she has always relied on her friends and never felt insecure about them being there for her or them just accepting her in general. She did not grow up in a rigid environment where friends were scarce and where she learned to rely on herself most of the time. You see where I'm going with this? You know who did struggle with that? Oh, that's right, Aisha. What a concept. I'll talk more on this on her own Nemesis redesign, because I will do that. But it annoys me so much that they not only stripped my girl Aisha of her awesome character, but they just went and watered down Keke Palmer's personality and just, no hate, I adore Keke. She's hilarious. I think she's a wonderful actress. But then they just watered down her personality and then mixed it with apologies, but stereotypical aggressive black girl, and then that became Aisha, and I hate it. I hate it so much. And it's sad because OG Aisha was an absolute icon. She was powerful but still sensitive and considerate. She didn't need to be the leader all the time, but was always prepared to take charge when it was needed. She was sporty without being judgmental of others' passions. For example, Stella's just, she liked being more girly, and it's like, Aisha never judged her for it. It's just like she made like jokes about it, but she never was like aggressive, at least in the earlier seasons. In the later season, she becomes like really like hostile towards her and like, bitch, this is not my Aisha. And I know people like her in the later seasons, which is fair, but like, I feel like you are like, she's a different character, and it makes me sad because I do really like OG Aisha, mostly because she's very relatable. Anyway, truly one of the most nuanced characters of her time, but I'm going to stop here and save some of this for her own video, because honestly, Aisha deserves like the world. She really just got so fucked. But yeah, anyways, before I just talk about Aisha in this Bloom-centric video, let me move on to the changes to the nemesis. You'll notice that I haven't been calling my redesign Vertigo. I haven't been referring to her as much, but I'm not going to call her Vertigo. And that's not because I don't like Vertigo, like the name. I think it's a really good name, and honestly, it fits with what I want for Aisha. I don't know if I'll even use the name there. And I alluded to it just now, but I am switching the nemesis concepts around, so Aisha would get what would be Vertigo, and Bloom would get what would be Sinka. But I'm still using Vertigo as a reference for Bloom's nemesis design, because honestly, Vertigo, like the nemesis designs are all really good, and I think complement the girls' actual, like, their personalized designs really well. I think my least favorite would who would my least favorite design wise be? Probably, actually, it will probably be Aisha. Sinka, not because it's bad, it's just I think the others are better. Sinka has, I like her silhouette, it's weird to me. Anyway, but I do love OG Vertigo's design, and each nemesis was, at least to some degree, like a mirror of their respective fairy, if that makes sense. The designs mirrored their respective fairy. But what you'll also notice is that I'm essentially smushing Dark Bloom and Vertigo together to create Bloom's new nemesis. I don't like the name Sinka, I've mentioned that before. Yes, I know it refers to energy sinks, I understand that. And it's really cool. It's a very cool concept, but it just doesn't sound nice. And also it's very basic, and it makes me think that Sinka is just a giant kitchen sink. In light of this, I will be picking a new name. It could change, but I like the name Tenebrow, or Tenenbrow if I want to add the N there. From the word tenebrous, meaning shut off. Well, the first meaning is shut off from the light, darky, murky, tenebrous depths. Yeah, I think it fits what I'm going for, where it's like a dark and murky version of Bloom, because that's what Vertigo, more than any of the other nemesis, are. It's a dark version of Bloom. It's not Dark Bloom, I'll get to that. But that's what Vertigo is. I mean, the second definition is hard to understand, obscure, a tenebrous affair, and 3, causing gloom. And those, by the way, for Merriam-Webster. And I like all of those meanings for what Tenebrow is, and who she is, and what she is to Bloom. I would change it a lot because, again, she's not Vertigo, but she is a dark version of Bloom. And let me explain. Although I would have liked to play into the whole energy sink motif, I couldn't think of anything short enough to be a nemesis name. And plus, this plays into the changes to the nemesis, to Vertigo / Sinka in general, like having Tenebrow as a name. I mentioned this, the main difference being this is now a dark reflection of Bloom, which yes, to some degree Vertigo was. It's unclear what she actually was, but this is very obviously a dark reflection of Bloom. You could say she's Dark Bloom. She's not. Well, okay. This could work any way you slice it, because she could be Dark Bloom and she also could not be Dark Bloom, but also, let me explain. It was always odd to me how Vertigo never played into Dark Bloom as at very least a reference to the OG show, because she's very similar to Dark Bloom, and even the concept behind her, very similar to Dark Bloom, not gonna lie. And here's the thing, World of Winx, timeline-wise, is really weird. They don't reference the main show almost at all. In fact, they don't transform until they get Dreamix. Roxy doesn't transform at all. But it's like it's not really an allusion to whatever transformation they have, because this version of the story, it's actually hard to pinpoint which transformation they should have. Technically, in my opinion, they could have just defaulted to Enchantix, because it is the most powerful form, and anything after that is just a variant of Enchantix. Fight me. But anyway, the main show is almost entirely separate from the main canon altogether. But even in that timeline, as I mentioned before, we see that Roxy still exists and knows about the Winx, but the fruity music bar has completely changed, and Roxy herself could just as well have come from a magical universe. And like, there's no other recognizable characters except all of them. Like, the men don't exist, although that's not changed. I don't really care that much. The professors obviously are at school, but then Roxy's dad isn't there, Morgana isn't there, literally any of the Earth Fairies just aren't there, which is okay, interesting. But as I've mentioned, it is an alternative universe, so they could have just been playing into that, but we don't know how much of an alternative universe it actually is. So theoretically, the earlier seasons may have happened just the same as we've seen in the OG show, or they may have been completely different. If it's the former, then Tenenbaum, being similar to Bloom, reflects Bloom's trauma in regards to that dark part of her, as well as Darkhar's malevolent forces still writhing somewhere inside of her. So if the events just stayed the same, then Bloom would remember Dark Bloom, and that would bring up all those awful memories of what she did, because that is a dark version of her. It's what Tenenbaum represents. And even an aside to this, Tenenbaum could just be Dark Bloom. When Tinkerbell summoned her, it could have just been the manifestation of Dark Bloom at that point, because technically she still exists within Bloom. It's complicated. If it's the latter though, then Tenenbaum becomes the Dark Bloom equivalent in this universe. So if we assume that season 2 never happened, this is just the Dark Bloom of this universe. You see what I mean? It's like, even though Dark Bloom didn't exist yet, she would still exist now, just as Tenenbaum. It's just, they could have played into this. They just didn't. Either way. I say that a lot, don't I? This is the fearful reflection of what Bloom is, and what she could become, and what she, I guess, was, if we take the opinion that the seasons happened the way they did. But it can only be powerful if she lets it, if she plays into it, and if she gives into her greatest weaknesses, her anger, her rage, her hubris. She'd work much the same as Sinka, because I like Sinka's mechanics, where the rings around her arms grow brighter as she absorbs more power. And not only does she throw it back to Bloom, but also hurls it around and causes destruction, arson around her. Would it be arson? Showing Bloom what she can become as the Dark Phoenix. she'd also probably take on a mixture of Vertigo's OG personality, but with the vicious quips of Dark Bloom. She a sassy hoe. But for the most part, she would just torment Bloom by antagonizing her, and then throwing the dragon flame back at her and the rest of the Winx, as well as just the environment around her, causing death. Well, I would want there to be death, but if you don't want death, just destruction, but death and destruction, she would cause all of that and show Bloom what she is. She's powerful, but her power can cause a lot of damage, especially if it's herself doing it, if she's ever antagonized in such a way. And there are ways I'd obviously change the way the nemesis work in general. The way World of Winx does it is very straightforward, and it's fine, but it seems sometimes a little bit rushed, or just sometimes some nemesis just don't get as much as others. Like the episodes present, I would probably want them to exist a bit longer and possibly overlap with each other, because that would make more sense. And even mayhaps a nemesis that teams up with the Winx at some point, and then at some point they have to let go of them, because that's just not sustainable, honey. I don't know. I'd want to do a rewrite on that some other time. Tenebra's design, I quite like it. The process was kind of new to me because I don't usually do like very, very exaggerated faces. Obviously, I exaggerate faces because I'm not doing realism. But with this one, I had to like pull the smile a lot higher up. The eyes are quite a bit bigger. I could have made the eyes even bigger if I wanted to. The nose is pretty standard, and the shading is a lot different because the sclera of the eyes are now also grey, which made this shading a bit odd. I think if it's in the time lapse, I like brought up a picture of like brass, and I was trying to shade the armor on her shoulders, on her hands, on her rings, on her legs. Like I wanted to shade them like brass because I don't know. It would make sense because it also gives her a jagged appearance, but also makes sense for a dark version of like Bloom, who doesn't usually wear very sharp. Like, she has a very rounded style. Like, yes, the style of the show is sharp. She herself is more akin to a cinnamon roll than like a samosa. Anyway, also the colors. I wanted to keep the cage thing on Vertigo, but it was initially like light blue, but I eventually changed it to purple because it fits the Dark Bloom scheme more, and I liked the Dark Bloom color scheme better because it's black and it's dark colors. But yeah, it made her seem a little bit more imposing, and notably, it just seemed out of place to make it light blue. And Dark Bloom does have purple on her, and this just seems like an evolution of that. And on that note, the hair was a pain, not going to lie. It looks cool. I like the hair. And I like the shapes around it. The only thing is, notably, I don't know if it was in the time lapse, but I used Bloom's Enchantix hair as a reference because in my mind, that's what Dark Bloom would be. She would be a leveled up version of Bloom, and she would have a twisted Enchantix. I didn't give her wings because the Nemesis don't have wings, and I just like the way they fly a lot better. Specifically Banshee, but yeah. Also, I gave her the sharp crown, which is it was in her original design, but it's supposed to contrast Bloom's more rounded crown in her original Magic Wings form. She has the big bow. She has multiple big bows as Vertigo, but I really like the aesthetic because it's like, I don't know. Also, she's almost clown-like. Well, I guess all of the Nemesis have the like white face paint with other colors on top of it. And it was just like, I'm keeping that for all of them. And I really like that because it just seemed like just a mask that's attached to the face. Also, notably, I don't know if you can see it, she has more cat-like eyes because Dark Bloom has that, but also it just looks creepier. And I made the eyes a bit smaller, like the pupil and the iris are a bit smaller. Make her look just more like crazed. I think that's the one way I'll put that. And yeah, the color scheme is very much just Dark Bloom, but I used a lot more shape on her clothing and like just elements from Vertigo a lot more than I used from Dark Bloom. So it's basically Dark Bloom's color scheme with Vertigo's modified outfit. I did give her a skirt because it just seemed like a natural evolution of Dark Bloom's skirt, and also it's a reflection of Bloom, so it makes sense that she'd have an outfit that could be a fairy form if you'd like changed it a little bit. Oh, and obviously I gave her the rings, like the glowing rings, to absorb power. I didn't make them smaller because I wasn't a fan of how they looked. Well, even if I made them bigger on here, but just in general, I didn't like how it looked on Sinka, and I don't think I'd like it on this design either. But yeah, that's the end of this. I think I said my piece. There's probably stuff I forgot. Maybe I'll bring it up in some other time, but this is me redesigning / remaking / just completely rewriting Vertigo / Sinka. Very confusing, I know, I'm sorry. Bye.